The damp, earthy smell of the cave hit me as soon as I stepped inside. My headlamp cast a weak circle of light that flickered with every step, barely enough to penetrate the oppressive darkness surrounding me. I glanced back at the cave's entrance, now just a pinprick of light in the distance. The thrill of adventure had brought me here, but now, standing on the precipice of the unknown, a pang of doubt crept into my mind. Still, I pushed forward, my boots crunching against the gravelly floor. The walls were jagged and rough, their surfaces glistening with moisture. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like ancient teeth, while stalagmites jutted up from the ground, creating a forest of stone. The air was thick and musty, each breath tasting of mold and minerals. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing through the cavern. At distance, the thrill of adventure had brought me here, but now, standing on the precipice of the unknown, a pang of doubt crept into my mind. I had always been drawn to places like this, dark, unexplored, and filled with secrets. Armed with only a map, a rope, and my trusty headlamp, I felt ready for anything, or so I thought. Hours passed as I navigated the twisting tunnels and narrow passageways. My map was barely legible in the dim light, but I managed to find my way, marking each turn with a piece of chalk. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the darkness became, swallowing my light and pressing in on me from all sides. It was then that I noticed the silence. The usual sounds of dripping water and shifting rock had faded away, replaced by an eerie stillness that set my nerves on edge. I paused, straining to hear anything that might break the monotony, but there was nothing. Just my own breathing, growing faster and more erratic with each passing moment. And then, a whisper, faint and indistinct, like a breath of wind. I spun around, my headlamp cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there, just the shadows, deep and impenetrable, shifting and writhing at the edges of my vision. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease that had settled over me. It was just my imagination, I told myself. The isolation and darkness were playing tricks on my mind. But even as I tried to convince myself, the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. The passageway narrowed to a crawl space, forcing me to get on my hands and knees. My heart pounded in my chest as I squeezed through, my breath echoing loudly in the confined space. On the other side, the tunnel opened up into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in the darkness above. I stood and shone my light around, taking in the scene. The cavern was filled with strange rock formations, their shapes twisted and grotesque. Shadows danced on the walls, creating the illusion of movement. And there, at the far end of the cavern, a figure stood. At first, I thought it was another explorer, but as I approached, I realized something was wrong. The figure was tall and thin, its limbs elongated and unnatural. It stood perfectly still, its face hidden in shadow. "Hello?" I called out with my trembling voice. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, watching me with unseen eyes. A chill ran down my spine. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run. But before I could move, the figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone in the cavern. Panic surged through me. I turned and fled, my headlamp bouncing wildly as I ran. The whispers were louder now, a cacophony of voices echoing in my ears. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The tunnel seemed to twist and turn at random, leading me deeper into the cave's labyrinthine depths. My heart raced, and my breath came in ragged gasps. The whispers followed me, relentless and unceasing, growing louder with every step. I stumbled and fell, my hands scraping against the rough rock. My headlamp flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled with the switch, my fingers trembling, and finally, the light came back on. I was in another cavern, smaller than the last. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. I didn't recognize any of them, but their presence filled me with a deep sense of unease. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stay here. I picked myself up and continued, my legs trembling with exhaustion. The whispers were closer now, almost as if they were right behind me. I didn't dare look back. As I stumbled through the darkness, I came across a narrow passageway that led to another chamber. This one was different. The air was colder, and a faint, sickly green light illuminated the space. In the center of the room was a large stone altar, covered in the same strange symbols I had seen earlier. I approached cautiously, my curiosity piqued despite my fear. The altar was old, its surface worn and weathered. There was something unsettling about it, as if it pulsed with a dark energy. And then I saw it. A small ancient book lying on the altar. Its cover was made of some kind of hide, and the pages were yellowed with age. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and opened it. The pages were filled with incomprehensible text and illustrations of grotesque creatures. As I flipped through the book, a sense of dread washed over me. This was no ordinary book. It was a tome of dark magic, filled with forbidden knowledge. I had to get out of here. I had to escape this place and warn someone about what I had found. But as I turned to leave, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of malevolent voices chanting in unison. I ran, clutching the book to my chest. The tunnel seemed to close in around me, the darkness pressing in from all sides. My headlamp flickered, threatening to go out again. The whispers were right behind me, a relentless ghostly presence that drove me forward. I could hear footsteps now, echoing through the caverns. Something was following me, something that didn't belong in this world. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, my breath ragged and my heart pounding in my chest. I came to a fork in the tunnel and hesitated for a moment, unsure which way to go. The left path was wider, but the right path seemed to slope upward, possibly leading to the surface. I chose the right and plunged into the darkness, hoping I had made the right decision. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. I could feel a cold presence behind me, a malevolent force that seemed to reach out with icy fingers. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning with exhaustion. The tunnel narrowed, forcing me to slow down. My headlamp flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. I fumbled for my spare batteries, my hands shaking uncontrollably. As I replaced the batteries, I could feel the presence growing stronger, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to suffocate me. I managed to get the light back on and continued, my steps unsteady. The tunnel opened up into another cavern, and there, standing in the center, was the figure. It was taller and more grotesque than before, its limbs twisted and unnatural. Its face was still hidden in shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and malevolent. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice echoing through the cavern. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from all around me. I could feel my sanity slipping away, the darkness closing in. Desperate, I reached for the book and held it up. "Is this what you want?" I shouted. The figure moved then, its limbs unfolding with a sickening crack. It stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. I backed away, my mind racing. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be something I could do. And then I remembered the symbols, the strange markings that covered the walls and the altar. Maybe they held the key. I opened the book and flipped through the pages, searching for anything that might help. The text was incomprehensible, but the illustrations seemed to depict some kind of ritual, a way to banish the evil presence. The figure was closer now, its cold eyes fixed on me. I could feel its breath, icy and foul on my skin. I had to act fast. I traced the symbols on the ground with my chalk, copying them as best as I could from the book. My hands were shaking and my vision was blurred with fear, but I kept going, driven by a desperate need to survive. As I finished the last symbol, the air around me seemed to thrum with energy. The figure stopped, its movements frozen. The whispers grew louder, a frantic chorus that seemed to pulse with the symbols. I placed the book in the center of the circle and stepped back, my heart pounding. The figure began to convulse, its limbs twisting and contorting. The whispers reached a crescendo, a deafening. As I finished the last of the ancient symbols, the oppressive weight of the darkness seemed to lift slightly. The old book, now lying open on the ground, glowed faintly with an eerie light. My hands shook, the chalk trembling in my grip, as I heard the whispering voices grow louder around me, their malevolent presence almost palpable. The shadowy figure loomed closer, its form more distinct now, a grotesque amalgamation of twisted limbs and hollow, burning eyes. I could feel its malevolence, its hunger for something only I could provide, but I had no intention of becoming its victim. I forced myself to focus, to remember the incantation from the book. Ad principium revocare, I whispered, the words feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. Ad principium revocare, I shouted, louder this time, my voice echoing through the cavern. The symbols on the ground flared with a blinding light, and the shadowy figure let out a guttural, enraged scream. The ground trembled beneath me, and the air seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. I could feel the presence of the cave itself reacting, as if it were alive, as if it understood what I was doing. The figure lunged at me, its hollow eyes filled with hatred and desperation, but the light from the symbols held it back, creating an invisible barrier between us. I continued the incantation, my voice steady now, growing stronger with each word. Ad principium revocare. With a final thunderous roar, the shadowy figure was pulled back, as if by an invisible force. It clawed at the air, trying to hold on to its form, but it was no use. The light consumed it, tearing it apart until nothing remained but the echoes of its screams. The cavern fell silent. The glowing symbols faded, leaving me in the dim light of my flickering headlamp. I collapsed to the ground, my body exhausted, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. For a long moment, I simply lay there, listening to the quiet, feeling the cool stone beneath me. The oppressive darkness was still there, but it felt different now, less malevolent, more peaceful. Gathering what strength I had left, I picked up the book and stood. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to leave this place, to find my way back to the surface, back to the light. The journey out of the cave was long and arduous, every step a struggle against my weary body and the lingering fear. When I finally emerged from the cave, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. I took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air, the warmth of the sun on my skin. I had survived. I had faced the darkness and come out the other side, but I knew I would never be the same. The cave, the shadowy figure, the ancient rituals, they had changed me. I had glimpsed something beyond our world, something ancient and powerful. And while I was free, I knew that a part of me would always remain in that cave, forever haunted by what I had seen and done. I turned away from the cave, my steps steady and determined. The journey had ended, but a new one was beginning, and whatever lay ahead, I would face it with the strength I had found in the darkness.